William Gladstone is one of the most famous Prime Ministers of the Victorian era. He served 4 terms in a remarkable career that spanned 60 years. He opposed the opium trade, supported Home Rule for Ireland, would become a vocal opponent of slavery, favoured electoral reform, and generally pushed policies intended to make Britain a fairer place. He considered himself a conservative in outlook, but was opposed to militarism and capitalist exploitation. Well, like any politician, it's hard to characterise his time in office as entirely good or bad. It certainly can't be denied that he remains, to this day, one of the best known and highly regarded Prime Ministers the country has ever had. But all good things must come to an end, and in 1898, just 4 years after retirement, he passed away at the age of 88. And he became the passenger, so to speak, of the only funeral train ever to run on the London Underground. He lived his final years at Hawarden Castle in Wales, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. In 1897, he suffered from facial neuralgia, and the following year he was diagnosed with cancer of the palate. However, the cause of death was given as a heart attack and old age. His family had intended for him to be buried at Hawarden, or Hawarden, or whatever, but the people of the nation had other ideas. He was to receive a full state funeral and to be interred at Westminster Abbey. This was rather magnanimous of Queen Victoria, who really did not get along with Gladstone. One question, though. How to get the great man's mortal remains from northwest Wales to London? The London and North Western Railway offered a solution. Funeral trains were far from unknown in the Victorian era. In fact, I've made a whole video about the station at Waterloo intended purely for the carriage of the dead. Before cars, the railways were the only practical way to transport bodies over long distance. So, a train was the obvious choice. The London and North Western laid on a special train. It consisted of 5 carriages hauled by one of their Precedent-class locomotives. Not only was the Precedent class a prestigious type of express locomotive, but this particular one, number 1521, was already named Gladstone. Gladstone doesn't survive, but classmate Hardwick does, and that's what you're looking at now. The coffin was carried in what is believed to be either a postal sorting van or a full brake. Whichever one it was, this wasn't a type of carriage normally used for passengers, if you can call a dead body a passenger. However, it was decorated with black cloth on the inside to make it more appropriate for its illustrious occupant. Now, as a little side note, the book I used for research in this, Final Journey, by Nicholas Wheatley, states that the locomotive was painted black for the occasion. I should point out that actually black was the livery carried by the LNWR's engines from 1873 onwards. In fact, the railway's chief mechanical engineer, Francis Webb, was present at a meeting of directors to decide on the livery, and declared, "Gentlemen, I will paint my locomotives any colour you like, so long as it is black." Maybe Henry Ford said something similar later on, but Webb undoubtedly got there first. Anyway, back to the funeral. The train was laid on at Broughton Hall, which offered a more direct route to London than the station at Hawarden. The operation was carried out fairly discreetly, Gladstone's widow not wanting a lot of crowds. The train departed at 7:52 p.m. and steamed through the night to Willesden Junction. Once there, the locomotive Gladstone was uncoupled and a new engine was attached. This was a rather less grand engine, number 788, of a class known as the 4-foot 6-inch tanks, due to the size of their driving wheels. This is not 788, but this is a member of the same class. These engines were used on local passenger trains normally, but they had one major advantage over the Precedent class. They could work on the Underground. The only way to get to Westminster Abbey by train was over the District Railway. The train ran from Willesden to Addison Road, now named Kensington Olympia, over the West London Railway. Here, it switched to the District Railway and ran to Earl's Court. From there, it was a straight run to Westminster. The locomotive was fitted with condensing gear to reduce the amount of steam it exhaled in the tunnels, so to speak. So the little tank engine really came into its own on the final leg of the journey. At 2 minutes past 1 in the morning, the train pulled up at Westminster Station, which in those days was called Westminster Bridge. The body was offloaded and taken to Westminster Hall via that passage that leads from the station, and there it lay in state until the funeral on the 28th of May. Oddly enough, there's a famous photo of Gladstone, the Prime Minister, not the engine, riding in a wagon on the Metropolitan Railway before its opening. So as one of the Underground's first passengers, it seems curiously appropriate that he should make his final journey by tube. Good evening, I hope you enjoyed this sombre tale from the tube. If you did, I would be most grateful if you would pay your respects by hitting the like button, or perhaps even subscribing for more. You may also wish to hit the bell icon to be kept up to date on my future videos. As a final note, I should point out that while Gladstone's is the only known instance of a funeral train on the Underground, there is an honourable mention. The philanthropist, missionary and social campaigner Thomas Bernardo was transported to his funeral from Liverpool Street to Barkingside, over what would become part of the Central Line. However, this took place in 1905 when it was an ordinary railway line. But you know, if you don't mention these things, someone in the comments section will. Thanks as always to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the black cloth to my parcels van. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.